Hey, cool, you made it. All right, so I know this is not my color. I'm not a person who really wears black. It's a bit too like heavy. But turns out this is like the thing for this week's book. So I borrowed a dress from Her Infernal Majesty. Don't tell her. She'll be really angry. But anyway, but before we get to that, I gotta tell you about this book that will really change your writing. Totally blew my mind about writing. So there are links down below. This book, really useful. Yeah, maybe I can use it to distract Her Infernal Majesty while I get her dress back on the rack. I don't know. I'm gonna get in trouble for this. Anyway, I'm wearing a little black dress because this week we are doing the little black dress book, as it were. We're doing Breakfast at Tiffany's. I know, we've all seen Breakfast at Tiffany's, haven't we? With the dress and Audrey Hepburn and it all looking really cool. Yeah, the book's nothing like that. The book is like totally different. The book is really good, but it's not exactly what you think you're going to be getting in for if you have watched the film and you thought, oh wow, I really like this film. It's so totally romantic. Yeah, not the book. The book ain't that. So, what is the book? The book was published in 1958 by Esquire magazine, having first been offered to Harper's Bazaar, which ended up turning it down. And it was written by Truman Capote. Truman Capote, who until that time had been writing short fiction and had not yet written his major work, In Cold Blood, which we will get to at some stage. But Breakfast at Tiffany's really made him huge. Is the story, well, saying story is a little bit strong because it's not really a story. It doesn't really have much in the way of a narrative. What it is, because it's very short. Remember, this thing was published in a magazine. Is barely a novel. It's like it's a novella, an extended short story, something that sits very. It's a novella that really sits closer to the short story end of novella. Novellas are a really uncomfortable, a very uncomfortable genre of writing. They're not quite short stories. They're not quite novels. They sort of sit in a gray area. Very, very hard to get published now that you don't have magazines that publish long fiction like they used to in the 50s. So it's a genre that's really gone out of fashion. Anyway, Breakfast at Tiffany's is less of a narrative and more of a really detailed character study. It's an absolutely fascinating character study. It's told in the first person by the narrator, who was Holly Golightly's upstairs neighbor. He is never named. Holly calls him Fred. Fred is the name of her beloved brother. We never actually find out his name. But Holly is the reason that we're reading this book. Holly is the focus of this book, and the book follows her and Fred's friendship as it develops. He first meets Holly, or first witnesses Holly, when she's hollering up the stairwell to the man who lives in the penthouse, a Japanese American photographer, to let her in because she's lost her key again. And this wakes him up at about 2 a.m. It also wakes up our narrator, who encounters her this way, only to find that having upset the neighbor in the penthouse, she now starts ringing his bell to get him out of bed to unlock the door for her. She is quite happy to use anybody. That is the first thing you should know about Miss Holly Golightly. Now, the second time Fred meets Holly is when she's sitting on the fire escape outside his bedroom window. She has climbed out of her own flat onto the fire escape and up the fire escape to hide from a gentleman who is drunk and demanding and violent, and she is waiting for him to fall asleep. So this is the second thing we know about Holly. Holly is, well, to put it politely, she's a party girl. She gets paid $50 for the powder room or the pleasure of her company. Exactly how far the pleasure of her company extends is a matter of conjecture. She says at one point that she has had 11 lovers since she was 13, that everything before that doesn't count, which is quite a confession. And when you realize that she has had 11 lovers since she was 13, and she doesn't count the lovers, or rather the child abusers who had sex with her before she was 13, everything else in Holly's life falls into place. This is why she married Doc Golightly, the Texan veterinarian, when she was 14. She is a survivor, baby. She's a survivor. This is not some romantic waif who needs to be helped. She doesn't need you to help her. She's a really, really damaged person. She actually forms no relationships outside her actual brother, Fred. She is quite willing to walk away from people. She says at one point that she has cultivated and taught herself to like older men, because these are the men who are willing to pay her $50 for the powder room. These are the men who she has learnt desire her. Well, who wouldn't? She's 18, 19. She's very young. She's very beautiful. And she's, in her own words, jazzy, which is one way of saying it. She has been test screened for Hollywood at 15. No one knew where she came from. She just had a real hick accent, whether it was hillbilly or Okie. Didn't matter. They didn't know, but they got her out of her accent, and they were going to put her in a film. However, she skipped out because this is what Holly does. Holly doesn't trust people. She says it's because she's a wild thing, but a canny reader can work out it's not because she's a wild thing. It's not because this is like what makes her romantic and wonderful. It's because she's an abused child. All her behavior is absolutely the behavior of a victim of abuse. This is not a picture of a lovely romantic, what do they call them? Manic pixie dream girl. She's not a manic pixie dream girl, as if that wasn't already a misogynistic title. She's not a manic pixie dream girl, although the film would make her so. What she is a seriously damaged girl. Fred, our narrator, is also rather interesting. She has a friendship, as much as Holly can have a friendship, with Fred, who is an aspiring writer. But Fred is also clearly gay. We can tell this because Holly has absolutely no sexual fear of Fred. There is one scene where she has him putting oil on her all under a sunbathing lamp. Very bad for your skin. And she is completely nude. Now, she would not do that if she believed that Fred was straight. Fred ain't straight. Fred is fascinated by her because she is living the unconventional life that he hopes to have in New York as well. He is seeking freedom. This is 1943. He is a young gay man in New York. And the other thing that helps tell us this, and it's a little bit subtle, is he mentions this is 1943. The war is on. Holly's actual brother Fred is fighting. He's overseas fighting. He's in the army. And our narrator talks about the fact that the draft board is sniffing around him. Now, if you have a look at John Dennismore's memoirs about drumming with the Doors, or as part of the Doors, he talks about being put up for the draft because he was younger than Ray and Robbie and Admiral Morrison's son, Jim. Yes, you heard right, Admiral Morrison's son. And so who were not eligible for the draft because they were too older, but John Dennismore was. And John Dennismore's solution to get out of the draft was to play gay, or to play gay curious, because in those days you could be dishonorably discharged if you were found to be gay, which was incredibly humiliating and incredibly damaging for people and their lives. So gay men had served in the military, were serving in the military, and had to keep that very, very under wraps. However, playing gay to get out of the draft was a thing. John Dennismore talks about this and about how he got put down as being potentially gay curious or having tendencies, and therefore got out of the draft. So that's another little tiny sign that Capote puts in there to indicate that our narrator is, like Holly, somebody who is living an alternative lifestyle in New York and taking advantage of that in New York. The book is a really fine book. It can be read pretty much in a sitting. Not a lot happens. Holly runs around with a bunch of wealthy men. She gets involved with a Brazilian diplomat. She has been naively, because Holly is not a well-educated and not a terribly sophisticated, in spite of her pretty clothes, young woman, and she has been running messages between Sing Sing and a notorious gangster and his lawyer. And this all comes out, and she loses the diplomat, and she flees the country. This is the penultimate thing. This is not the ending of the film, because the film, she leaves with, she lets the cat go and then gets the cat back and leaves with George Papard's character. And like, I mean, yeah, that's all nice and romantic, except he's gay. He's really gay. She does leave the cat. He actually calls her a bitch over that and heartless. And she regrets it, but she does leave it after the narrator promises to look for it. But Holly is incapable of forming secure attachment. And that's what we see. She would like to. She would definitely like to, but she's really incapable of it. And because she's incapable of it, we get this fantastic, absolutely fantastic character study. It's so true. The one thing I would say that I wish wasn't in it, the one little tiny thing, and it's actually a reason why I don't read that many Americans, mid-century Americans, because I find it quite unpalatable, the casualness of it, which is the use and the completely gratuitous use of the N-word. It's used a couple of times, and the book would not at all suffer to not have that. It actually, for me, it spoils an almost perfect little gem of a book. It's a flaw that was unnecessary and ugly. I guess you can take The Boy Out of the Deep South, but yeah, little sad about that. I read it, and it's like, oh, it's just an ugliness that it's like, oh, I don't like that. I do find that happens a bit with Americans, because that the normalization of racism in 20th century American culture is quite widespread. It's sort of, it leaves me feeling kind of icky, the same way as if I see anti-Semitic references in a book. It's just like, that you didn't need to do that. You just didn't need to do that. Anyway, as breakfast at Tiffany's. So, peace. And I will see you again another time. Bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books, and other materials to help with your writing.